In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, everybody, to Cardinal Crimes. We are going to get right into it today. The case I have for you is heartbreaking. A mother murdered in Des Moines, Iowa on Christmas Eve, leaving behind 2 children. Now, when researching this case, I was particularly surprised at the lack of coverage it received in the news, especially because police have stated there is one specific person who they are sure has the information they need, but that they won't talk. So who is this one person standing between justice for this Iowa mother and her family? Let's see what we can find. On December 24th, 2013, 911 operators in Des Moines, Iowa received a call. The caller told operators that someone had been shot in a home 3 times. It was around 9:35 p.m. The home was on Francis Avenue in Des Moines on the north side of the city. When first responders arrived, they found the victim, a resident of the home, deceased. The victim was 34-year-old Johnita Clemons. And let me say up front, there were 3 articles published in the days following this shooting, just 3. And one was just 1 or 2 sentences correcting a statistic they had used in the previous article. There was very little information published. And I find a lot of the times when I'm researching cold cases and picking out ones to cover on the show, I find a lot of cases in Des Moines specifically have very little reporting, and usually they are related to shootings in Des Moines. And now I understand why there might not be a lot of reporting, there just might not be a lot of information out there. But this case seemed different. So let's talk about what was released to the public following the shooting. According to articles, a woman had called 911 around 9:35 p.m. saying someone had been shot and 3 shots had been fired. We know based on those articles that were published that detectives weren't able to verify the number of shots fired, but that they questioned 4 witnesses and claimed to make, quote, significant progress. We learn in these articles that police say the 911 caller was questioned but wasn't initially cooperative. We learn that the victim is 34-year-old Johnita Clemons and that she has 2 children, a son and a daughter, and had been engaged since January of that year. We also learn that police had been dispatched to this home 6 times in 2013, once for a medical issue, but 5 times for domestic disputes. Now, there is no information initially published on who was in the home with her. Her fiance wasn't named at all, and there's no information initially published on if her children were home or not. There's also no information on her injuries or where the shots even came from. There isn't really even a call on the public to submit tips. Now, based on the wording and everything that was released and the things that weren't released, to me, at first glance, it appeared to be a domestic issue. And I wondered if this was why maybe the murder wasn't reported on initially. My first thought when I read these initial articles was that it seemed as though she had been shot by an intimate partner. Now, they don't explicitly say that, but they put in the number of previous visits to the home for domestic disputes, mentioned she had been engaged, and maybe I'm being quick to leap to that conclusion, but that was just my initial thought, especially with there being almost no other context or information provided. And statistically, it seems like a likely conclusion. But more information is released later, which we will get into. But first, who was Johnita Clemons? Johnita was 34 years old, and she was born in Denver, Colorado. And she worked multiple jobs to provide for her family. She worked at the Holiday Inn Airport as a front desk clerk and was working her way up to a management position at a Burger King. She had also been attending school part-time to become a human services worker. She was the mother of 2 children, a daughter and a son, and it's later reported that the 2 were not home at the time of the shooting. But her daughter, who was 14 at the time, remembers the night her mother was killed. She recalled that night in an interview in 2021 and said both her and her brother were with their grandma that evening. At a certain point, her daughter says they were going back to their Francis Avenue home, but that there was a massive police presence. She said when they arrived, there were police, there was crime scene tape, detectives, crime scene technicians, the works. Her grandma got out of the car and police wouldn't tell her anything, except that she needed to take her grandkids back with her and that people were downtown being questioned. Despite the police not providing any information, news of the shooting was already spreading on social media. And that's where Johnita's daughter learned that her mother had been shot and killed. She said, quote, "I got on Facebook and I had seen a rest in peace post and my mom was tagged in it. That's how I found out my mother was dead." I cannot imagine learning of such tragic news over social media and at such a young age. But this brought up even more questions for me. How did the news start spreading on social media so fast? It wasn't until this article in 2021 that I was able to find that her kids weren't in the home. But these articles still are not saying who was with Johnita when she was shot. I could see there maybe being neighbors outside or people who had started to gather after seeing the large police response. So that could be how people started realizing that it was her. Or I wonder again, was someone with her? Did they then start messaging people, spreading the news? What else is revealed later, though, is that the shots didn't come from inside the house. In this 2021 Who TV 13 article, it is revealed that it was a drive-by shooting. And for many of the unsolved shooting deaths in Des Moines that I've talked about, many of them are drive-by shootings. And there is just so little reporting on them. And the fact that they are drive-bys, would obviously contribute to that. But there seems to be so much more to Johnita's death. Because in a KCCI article published on December 24th, 2021, it says Des Moines police say someone fired several rounds from the street inside the house. But it says, quote, "Investigators don't believe Clemons was meant to be the target." This article goes on to say that Des Moines Police Sergeant Paul Perizek says investigators started following leads after the shooting. Those leads brought them to people who still aren't cooperating. It says, quote, "There's one person that we're fairly confident has the information we need. We've visited with him multiple times over the years since the murder, but he won't budge." So who could this person be? Initially, I wondered about the 911 caller. Was the caller someone with Johnita in the home? It definitely could have been a neighbor too, maybe someone who heard the shots. And there was that bit about the caller being uncooperative when questioned, which again, I do not view someone being uncooperative with police as a sign of guilt. To me, that points to probably community distrust of police, which is a very real thing and for valid reasons. And also to my listeners, remember, you do not have to talk to cops. I would, in fact, probably encourage you not to talk to police. I have personally seen many instances where they try to catch you saying something wrong so they can pin suspicion on you. They can and will use anything you say against you, and they are legally allowed to lie to you. So distrusting police is something I 100% understand. But the 911 caller can't be the person they say they are confident has more information, right? Because the caller is described as a woman. And police said regarding the person that has the information, we visited with him multiple times. So, in my opinion, the most likely individual they are referring to would be the fiancé. Now, Johnita's fiancé is never mentioned in any of the articles I could find, but on the Iowa Cold Cases write-up by Jody Ewing, her fiancé is named as Richard Ball. And I found a Richard Ball from Des Moines, Iowa. And if it is the same Richard Ball Johnita was engaged to, he is not a good guy. And based on what he was involved in, an investigator saying they don't believe Johnita was the intended target, I think he could have been it. In an article by William Morris in the Des Moines Register published on October 25th, 2023, a really horrific picture of Richard Ball is painted. The article details Ball's crimes, which he ended up pleading guilty to in, I believe, June of 2023, and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. In Ball's guilty plea, he admitted to threatening and pressuring multiple women into engaging in prostitution for him. He also admitted to physically and sexually abusing these women himself. Ball, quote, convinced several victims that they could demonstrate her love or contribute to their relationship by engaging in commercial sex acts. And this is point blank. This is sex trafficking. And I want to be so clear because I think so many have this view of human trafficking and sex trafficking. Like it's this scenario where a stranger kidnaps you, like the movie Taken. But most often, victims are trafficked by someone they know. And they might not even realize that what is happening to them is trafficking. And it's so important to talk about the reality of what victims of sex trafficking usually go through, so more people are aware and know the signs. Just this last paragraph, that he would pressure women and say that they could show their love by having sex with people for money. It's really sick stuff, but this type of abuse in a relationship happens. But Ball also did, according to court documents, literally kidnap someone for trafficking. The Des Moines article says, quote, in one case, he kidnapped and assaulted one woman whom he forcibly brought from Missouri to Des Moines. Prosecutors note in court filings that several victims at different times tried to escape by moving out of the state, only to be stalked or tricked by Ball into returning. A statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Southern District of Iowa says, quote, Ball kidnapped one of the victims during the course of trafficking her. Ball admitted that he transported the victim against her will in a vehicle from Missouri to Des Moines so that he could physically assault her during the trip as a form of revenge against another victim. It unfortunately gets worse. Ball seemed to target women who were mothers, who had children who were minors. It says, quote, in court filings, prosecutors called it particularly sickening that Ball targeted women with minor children, whom he would groom and abuse alongside their mothers. One girl was abused by Ball for about 5 years, starting when she was 13. He admitted to raping and soliciting explicit videos from underage girls. So, in total, some of the charges included sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, kidnapping, sexual exploitation, and attempted sexual exploitation of a minor, and conspiracy to distribute marijuana. And while he wasn't charged and sentenced for these crimes until the 2022-2023 timeframe, it's probably safe to assume that this type of behavior had been going on for a while. And so again, if this is the Richard Ball that Johnita was engaged to in 2013, 10 years before he was arrested for these crimes, it really makes me worried for what he could have put her through, and also what her children could have gone through. Hopefully nothing, but it's scary to think that someone like this could have been around them. Now, I mentioned before that one of the few articles covering Johnita's death was a mere sentence or two correcting a statistic in a previous article. That statistic was that Johnita's murder was the 14th murder in Des Moines in the year 2013. And while researching this specific case, I came across an article in The Guardian published on August 15th, 2023. And the article was talking specifically about the disproportionate rates of murder of Black women in Iowa. The article focused on statistics from the year 2020, where the overall number of homicides increased by 63% from 2019. The article says that in 2020, there was a national rise in homicides, but that an overlooked aspect was the number of Black women killed. The article says, quote, The Guardian looked back at 2020 and found that for Black women in the U.S., the homicide rate rose 33%. That's a sharper increase than for every demographic except for Black men, and more than double the rate of white women. Many attribute the increase in gun homicides of Black women to years in disinvestment in Iowa's Black communities and the ease with which someone in the state can get a gun. And I can 100% attest to how easy it is to get a gun in Iowa. When I was in college, I received a handgun as a gift. I was working at Starbucks at the time, and one of the regulars was the town sheriff. Now, I told the sheriff, whose name was Jim, about this handgun I had received as a gift, and I asked him what I needed to do to get it registered and make sure it was all good to go. He said, nothing. It's good to go. You don't need to do anything. I, to be sure, asked if I needed a background check, if I needed to have it registered in my name, and he said, nope, it was given as a gift, so technically a private transfer, and that I didn't need to do a thing. That to me is so entirely unacceptable. People always say laws won't stop criminals from getting guns. They'll find a way. Sure, but we aren't even putting up an obstacle for them at this point. I could go on about gun safety regulations, and I plan to do so at a certain point, but I need to stay on track. So let's go back to this article. Mentioned in it is a woman named Calvetta Berry, who founded the organization in Iowa called Mothers Against Violence. The organization's purpose is to prevent violence by educating parents and youth on the value of life, self, and respect for others. Calvetta keeps a small notebook with her full of the names of murder victims in Iowa. One of the names in her book is Johnita Clemons. She said that after Johnita was killed, she stepped in and bought gifts for her children. Each year, in addition to many other events, they hold a victims' walk in Des Moines, where they remember the names of those who have died. This year's, too, had an event that they ran in tandem with the Victims Walk that they called the Put the Guns Down, Pick Up a Mic talent show, encouraging young people to come together to build community. And this is so important. Research consistently shows when people's basic needs are met, healthcare, housing, food, and a livable wage, crime rates are lower. Young people who turn to violence or gangs are often lacking community elsewhere. If you don't give people opportunity to find community with safe individuals, they'll find it somewhere else. Reading about Calvetta's organization, Mothers Against Violence, really gives me hope. We need more people out there building community and organizing and fighting for change to make our neighborhoods safer. If you're interested in learning more about her organization or donating, I will have some links in the show notes. Now, this Christmas will mark another holiday Johnita's children are spending without their mother. Johnita's daughter said this in an interview. To me and my brother personally, you guys will never understand the hurt and the pain that we feel losing our mother. To have no justice for her is an insult to injury. You know who you are. You know what you did. And if you loved my mom, if you loved any of your family and her family, you would come forward. If you have information on the murder of Johnita Clemons, it's time to come forward. I will put a link in the show notes to where you can submit an anonymous tip. And if you know anything about the person police believe has the information they need, you can report that too. I have put in a records request for this case to try and learn more about the investigation and the previous calls to her home for domestic-related disputes. If I receive anything, I will put out an episode with an update. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.